Meeting is being recorded. Okay, so Andy, thank you for joining us. I was really impressed with Andy's with the way that Andy handled a case recently, and I wanted to get that kind of shared with you. And it'll be a little bit kind of interactive because you can ask questions. It's just a discussion Q&A. We've got the report to share wherever we go. But perhaps, I mean, Andy, maybe I could ask you to introduce yourself to start with. What's your background and the kind of work you're doing?
Sure. I actually know a few people on the call, so I'll keep this reasonably light, I think. So I first started speaking to Lindsay and looking at Mirror Mirror when 4 months ago, maybe something like that, 5 months ago. So really not that long. Previous to that, I've got what you might call a bit of a checkered history, which doesn't mean I've been in and out of jail. It just means I've done lots of different things over the years, to be honest. So I've been a HR director in a global consultancy. I've been an organizational development consultant for must be coming up for 15 years now, 20 years, something along those lines. I'm a qualified executive coach and I'm a psychotherapist. So I've got quite a few sort of like different strings to my bow. Over the last 15 or 20 years, I've been working with teams and organizations, mostly around change in upwards of 20 different countries all around the world. So lots of different stuff. It's been quite exciting, actually, if I'm honest. I've loved pretty much all of it. So where I've ended up is having quite an eclectic viewpoint and a right jumbled mix of work that I do today, because I've done so many different things in the past. I tend to have well, you know, actually, I sometimes say to people, I've got the attention span of an onion bargee. So if what that means for me is that I have to do, in order to remain motivated, 3 or 4 different types of work at the same time. So that's kind of where I am now. So today I do a mix of team development, coaching and leadership development, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so thanks, Andy. And you did, I particularly like what you're bringing about the Gestalt piece to this, but maybe that'll come out in the content of your the story.
I forget about that sometimes. Yeah, the model of psychotherapy I trained in is Gestalt. So that gives me a certain lens when I look at team dynamics and I look at people.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask a few questions and prompt you for answers through the structure of this, because we're not just going to look at what happened with the team, but we want to look at the process and the way that Andy set them up to go manage them through the process.
Set them up to be less aligned when I'd finished than they were when they started.
We'll come to afterwards and what that meant. But yeah, so how did the job come about, and how was it set up then?
So it was actually set up by you and by Mirror Mirror. So the first interaction that I'd had with this client was because Lindsay tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I wanted to get involved facilitating a report feedback that was happening to a small consultancy. They're a management consultancy with people in, I think there were people in like 3 different countries on the call, something like that, all in Western Europe. So reasonably consistent culture-wise. But the first involvement I had was a briefing with Lindsay, and then more or less after a bit of emailing, went straight into the workshop.
Yeah, and so it's worth saying they're a strategy implementation consultancy. So what they do is right up the street from Mirror Mirror, and a couple of their consultants had done a job with us already before, but they had new people in. This is going to be the bare story. It's going to be no kind of gloss. There were several learnings on the way, so let's get into what happened. I think the first thing probably worth mentioning is that because I had the contact with the team, I was in contact with one of the team members who was delegated to manage this process on let's call it then the client, on the client side. So the initial setup was me talking to my contact point. Then Andy was put straight in to run the workshop based on the data. And Shall I share some of that data on the screen, or at least the top 5 low 5 behaviours?
Yeah, I think so. That'd be really useful. Because we got together and Robert was with us as well, actually, wasn't he? So it was me, Lindsay, and Robert sat down to have a look through the report and look at the data in it. And I guess what came out when we were reading through it were a few different things. First of all, as with most teams, there were areas of it where they were reasonably aligned already. So this wasn't really, or it doesn't look like a catastrophically misaligned team on the way in. But there are areas where their agreement with each other could be dialed up a little bit. And when we started to look at the behaviors, look at the ranges on some of the behaviors, and particularly those that were linked to psychological safety, was one that was coming up in quite a big way. A suggested focus for the workshop began to emerge from the data, because really their alignment around strategy, their alignment around forward direction seemed reasonably consistent across the team. You never get these things 100%, but it was good enough. The areas where there was most diversity in the scores that were coming through were around things like there.
Yeah.
So easy to ask team members for help, clarity on roles and responsibilities, positive and equal treatment in the team, and some of the behaviours that were associated with the psychological safety grouping.
Yeah, and so there are a few kind of sort of flags that came up. But what actually, so there were 2 workshops planned, both virtual, 2 days apart, 2 hours each. Can you recall kind of roughly, what sort of happened from a process perspective as well as a kind of team dynamics perspective?
What, all the way across the whole piece?
Well, or start where you want to.
Yeah, okay. So I guess process-wise, there was a contact at the client that was liaising with you, that was setting the workshops up from an admin perspective, but also looking at what we were suggesting the focus area was going to be, and some of the outline for the 2 workshops and the approaches. I then sat down and designed what workshop 1 and workshop 2 would look like. So 2 2-hour workshops, 2 days apart, based on the behavioral indicators that were coming through from the Mirror report. And to do that, when I'm working with remote groups, I use a tool called Mural. Which, can I just get a quick show of hands? Does everyone know what Mural is? Put your hand up if it's yes. Okay, let me tell you then. So Mural is a collaboration workspace. You can get yourself an account with it relatively easily, mural.co. You just log in, set that up. You can then design a shared workspace that you can just share a visitor link to through a call like this with other people that are on it. So I find when I'm breaking people down into subgroups, or where I've got different groups of people working on a same topic, Mural really helps because they have a shared workspace to do that in. They can record post-it notes with their reflections and group process on the way through and things like that. And it means that I can rotate subgroups much more smoothly through a similar series of tasks, allowing them to build on each other's work, rather than doing something in quite a detached way and then coming back into plenary, or simply talking in plenary. So when I designed these 2 workshops, I designed a process for the 2 2-hour workshops that was a mix of reflection, subgroup exercise activity supported by a Mural board, plenary reflection, more data coming in, and so on and so forth, so that the people in the groups were moving around behavioral groupings one after another and really discussing and surfacing what they meant for them, like the sense that they were making from the reports that they were looking at in the actual workshop, and building some shared language around it. So in workshop 1, we opened up, we did the intros. Lindsay had sent the report over to the client, who then distributed it. They took 15 or 20 minutes, I think, just in personal reflection to read the report and digest it. And then we went straight into sense making. From a group process point of view, we left them kind of open. at the end of the first workshop, overnight through the next day and into the next day when the second workshop was, and then we pulled those threads back through and began to turn it into a bit more of a so what. So to actually form a bit of an action plan from it and to pull it together into some individual commitments for what people were going to do differently as a result of the conversations and actually having gone through the work over the 2 sessions.
And so it started getting a little bit hairy. Would you say, shall I put some of the responses on the mural board up on the screen?
Yeah, you can do.
Because what we found,
I guess it depends on your definition of hairy.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, I didn't find it particularly hairy as I was going through. I think because the topic area was psychological safety, and you then begin to dig into, like, where is this coming from? Like, what are people observing? What are the behaviors that people are seeing? And then people begin to move around that and talk about it, talk about some of the sense they're making of it. What I witnessed was quite a high level of honesty about what the problems were. So rather than hairy, I'd say that there was a good deal of conversation happening in the subgroups and in the main group that this team simply hadn't had up until that point in time. It had been under the table.
I suppose why I'm calling it hairy is because my memory of it is kind of biased by the fact that I had a follow-up call with the team leader straight after the workshop, which we'll come on to. And he was in a high state of kind of anxiety and stress about the entire thing. But before we get into that, this is the whole mural board from the workshops. And so I can zoom into different pieces, but we started in this place, didn't we?
We did.
So it was a really nice way to look at different questions around. For example, we put different questions up, and they're now available in the shared resources to deal with different breakout groups going to talk about different things. They were either talking about purpose and goals, the strategic side, or behaviors, or organizational support, concerns and frustrations, or the developments, the horizon scan piece. And the questions around that were things like, do you recognize this? We didn't have anyone going into this bit, which is why there weren't any comments, but what could be behind some of these challenges? Do you feel the team is ready to deal with the impacts? So there are a set of clean questions, if you like, for each of these sections that people were posting onto. And like you said, they were sharing quite a lot. They were in their breakout groups and they were posting onto different pieces about this is part 1 of the workshop. The first workshop is basically, can we relate to the data? Can we accept this current reality that the report is telling us, right? And so especially on the behaviors piece, because the key flag that came up was about psychological safety. This is where the process of alignment can be uncomfortable to start with, because people are posting things like this. What needs addressing? Positive and equal treatment, constructive discussion culture, freedom to raise issues and questions, which mirrored what was in the report, right?
And it's also quite ironic that the team lead had such a big problem with that. They had to phone you immediately afterwards, which kind of says quite a lot, really. Yeah.
And some of the backstory that we discovered in this process is that there are a lot of junior members of the team. And then they're kind of in 2 tiers. There's the consulting senior bunch and then the junior support bunch. And the junior support bunch felt that they couldn't articulate themselves, felt that they weren't being heard, etc. So what actually came out of the workshops, of the first workshop at least, was this elephant in the room that people knew was there, but hadn't really addressed together. Do you recall how that then moved into the next workshop? If I zoom out and go to the format that you used, to capture in the second round. So then we left them to sleep on it, right? And they had done their plenary sessions and they talked about what they felt and recognized the current reality. The next the next workshop was designed to look at, okay, so what next?
Mm.
And you took that into 4 behaviors, didn't you?
Yeah. So what we did, what I did, was to look across the areas that got, I think they were the lowest scores in the report. So constructive discussion culture, freedom to raise issues and questions, positive and equal treatment in the team, clarity on roles and responsibilities, and really just looked at, okay, so if you're scoring these the lowest at the moment, what's your current experience? What do you want it to be in the future? And what will you commit to do to move between the 2 states?
Yeah. So it's asking people in those breakout groups. So did you do 1 breakout group at a time for these sections?
Yeah, 1 at a time on the way through. And then also when we did that, because in the first workshop, there was a bit of a distortion in the way that people were co-located, which we didn't know about until we got into it. But when we opened it up, the 3 most senior people were all in the same room, and everybody else was remote on laptops, which distorted the whole piece on the first day because they couldn't be mingled into subgroups with anybody else. They had to remain on their own all the way through the whole thing. On the second day, that was different, and everybody was remote. And there was a different feeling to the second workshop as a result of that, because we were able to more smoothly rotate people round. And I think that's also worthwhile noting. Every time we broke people into subgroups, they were in a different combination.
So I really like this. I mean, it's very, very structured, really helps people to focus in on what are they going to do about going forward. What are you experiencing now? So reminding them what actually, how does it feel? What is going on? You know, we don't say things because it's not worth the ag. Issues are not met with openness or understanding. You know, really got to the nub of it. I mean, so the team leader, as we now know it, really needed much more setup and advice, and should have had direct contact with Andy to start with, rather than me with the delegated representative. So that's now in our training, that actually providing advice and being that a coach that then goes into a facilitator role in the workshop is absolutely critical, because otherwise you're giving leaders a whole heap of problems that they didn't know they had, and you're not holding their hand through it, which causes massive anxiety and stress. Moving from current experience and what people want to see.
You know, just on that point, I think it did for this individual. It's right to put that in the process going forward. So aside from Mirror Mirror, like I'm doing a piece of work with a team at the moment randomly in Jordan, and in the build up to that work, I've had one-to-ones with the chief exec. I then have one-to-ones with each of the senior leadership team, with an hour with each person. Then I have another one with the chief exec, and then I do the half-day team session. So the build up to it is very different to what the build up was in this one. There were 2 other factors that I think were quite interesting in this. The report findings, while the contact that Lindsay was setting the workshop up with at the client had seen the report and then distributed it before, she hadn't shared that on internally. So the team lead came in totally blind, which I wasn't quite aware of on the way in until we all started looking at the report in the first session. So he didn't have any time to prep himself. And psychological safety, some of the emotional piece around that, the empathy, the need for building a sense of belonging. In hindsight, we should, very. Seemed to speak directly to an area where he was most uncomfortable.
And you know what? When you talk about this now, it seems so obvious. I mean, listening to this on the call, you may be thinking, yeah, you know, of course you need to set it up. But because it was almost like there was some bias creeping in, because we were dealing with a consultancy, and the main objective was to have them experience it and learn about it so they could use it with their clients, that got lost. And I didn't check that the report had gone and been read by the team leader before he got in, because he probably thought, yeah, this has been recommended to me by a trusted source. This is something that the kids can learn from, and I'm too busy to deal with it.
But to Steve's point that he's just dropped in the chat, when you go in and you do these kind of workshops and people come together in groups and they begin to talk about this kind of stuff, really your role as a facilitator is to create the framework for it, hold the process, and actually make it a safe space for people to have the conversations. You can't always predict what's going to happen when you go in to talk about these kind of things. You can have a process that sort of prepares people for that uncertainty, but you can't, to borrow the words that he put in, legislate for every outcome on the way through.
Yeah, and I think just having this as part of the process would give you an opportunity to check out how important is this setup for this leader at this time. So
yeah, and then we got to commitments.
Yeah, and so there was quite a lot of this. We didn't get into, I mean, so I was supporting obviously, and I wasn't leading it, but we didn't get into actually putting this into a plan per se, but had that delegated as one of the actions.
Yeah, so the client contact that set it up was going to gather this and then actually turn it into a plan for what they were going to do. And I guess what this does from a broader point of view then, because you'll go back in, in 3 months' time, did you agree with them? Something like that?
Yeah.
To do the follow-up survey. The frame that we gave this in terms of the commitments was, before we come back in 3 months and resurvey the team around some of these things, what will you commit to doing differently as a result of having had these conversations that would positively impact your score? And then if you go over to the left a bit, isn't there something about the change this would make?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because this was actually where we ended. If you do all this, what do you imagine the change will be?
Okay, yeah. How this will impact your motivation, and how will you hold yourselves accountable? So, I mean, this is available. I mean, I can share this as a resource if anybody wants to look at it, but I just thought it was a really neat way of focusing people's attention on a remote workshop. Shall I go to the post-workshop measurement results?
Yep.
Are you ready, guys? So I'll tell you about the call from the team leader in a minute, but it's like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
Well,
realizing the scale of the problem.
Well, indeed. And that's a second major learning is that, and we're going to produce a video, by the way, for participants so that they know what to expect, what the alignment process can look and feel like, and how it can affect different teams differently. And here, I think because there was a big kind of unspoken elephant that people didn't really want to admit to, the positivity went down, even though they did have more clarity about the level of alignment to organizational vision in the end, and the alignment.
You know, the process of increasing alignment around things, in my experience, is very rarely a comfortable one, because what it involves is, particularly around issues to do with psychological safety and how groups are with each other, is quite a lot of feedback between individuals that may or may not be welcome. There's almost a lifting of the lid on what's actually going on for people in a process on the way through this. And sometimes people like that and sometimes they don't. So I'm not too worried about the positivity score, if I'm honest. I didn't actually react badly to that when I saw it come back through. It actually felt quite reflective of sort of like the dips and flows of them as a group as we were on the way through the 2 sessions. I was quite pleased at all the stuff that was getting posted up on the board, more than anything else, and the fact that 2/3 of them were saying they'd never spoken about this stuff before.
Well, and the comments, when we say what changed, this is what people said. Awareness of weaknesses and willingness to change. I'll just let you read those. So this to me kind of gives me the impression that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with this in the sense that they're still in the process of alignment. And the next steps were that we were to have a follow-up meeting with the team leader. And surprisingly, that hasn't occurred yet. Hasn't been set up yet.
I don't think it will occur because he's just too uncomfortable with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Really, and that came out all the way through the whole piece. I think if he'd known what it was going to be like before it started, the workshops wouldn't have happened.
And on the other hand, 2 of their senior consultants have said how good they thought it was and how they'd like to do the training. And one of them completed the training last week and wants to.
Did he already complete? That's good.
Sophie did, and wants to run it with their clients. So I think we kind of polarized them a little bit. But had the setup been better with the team leader? So anyway, feedback.
You know, it's easy to say shoulda, woulda, coulda. Sometimes people have to learn to take care of themselves in these kind of environments, and he wasn't set up himself to do that. Honestly, there was nothing particularly challenging about that workshop. I've been in far more meaty ones than that over the years, just that he found it difficult. And I think when you look at the feedback from his team and his direct reports in the survey during and then afterwards, you can kind of see maybe something of the dynamic echoing out in that.
And what this is making me think from a sort of business point of view is we don't want that, even though it's not so bad to have a negative result because they're still in the process. It's not great publicity. And maybe we'd be better off not measuring the results until they've gone further through the alignment process, because they clearly haven't finished the process yet. So what's the point in saying now we're going to measure the results when they've not finished yet?
But you never, well, actually, no, that's a big statement. You're very unlikely to reach alignment around something as complex as current levels of psychological safety and behaviours in 2-hour workshops. That I just think that's quite a tall ask, really.
Oh, yeah.
You can sort of like surface conversation, create a space where people kind of look each other in the eyes and say the things that they've actually been thinking, and begin to process that. But it's what they choose to do with it afterwards that actually makes the difference.
Yeah, and a nice comment there. I mean, you guys can come off mute and we can turn this a bit more into discussion if you like. But Michael, your point there, Mirror's role is not to align teams. It's to show them where they are and where they're not aligned so they can actually do the work themselves, which is true. We are alignment facilitators. And Pascal's point here is about what they do with this that counts. So, yeah, I mean, so anyway, what the team leader said to me when he phoned up, by the way, you know, almost straight afterwards, he said, I can't complete this measurement form. It doesn't work for me. You know, the online survey, everybody else had completed it. So I said, okay, I'll give you a hard copy one. And I sent it to him, but because it's designed to be hard copy, it's difficult for you to actually add numbers into it. So he said, I'll just tell you right now, positivity 1 out of 5. And so that's where the positivity came from, because there weren't that many people in the workshop.
No, there was only 8 of them. I knew that as soon as you showed me the report, even though you didn't tell me who it was that had put the 1 on. No one else in that group would have put the 1 on it. But,
no, but what he did say, because he's in the business of dealing with big pharmaceutical companies and their leaders and implementing strategy, and he's from a military background. Not that necessarily says anything, but I think he felt a bit affronted, and he basically said, if we were doing this ourselves, we would ensure that the leader doesn't have all of this stress and all of this anxiety, which is his roundabout way of telling me how he's experienced it. Because I would give them a pathway through to see that there was a route between the problems and the solutions. And I didn't have any of that. You know, none of this wasn't all clear to me, and you know, it wasn't. I didn't resonate with some of that, and this has raised problems I didn't know I had, and it's not true anyway because we've got loads of associates who would have said something else, so it wasn't the real team. You know, and you could just hear him basically being hurt, and we don't want to do that to people. And that's partly the setup. It's partly the way that it was handled internally. It was partly because the objective was probably twofold rather than onefold. It was about aligning them and teaching them how to use the process. So there were a lot of learnings in there, and it's all gone into the training around how people can react and how we don't want this to be. We need them. Would you agree? We need this to be as comfortable as possible, right? Even though it can be an uncomfortable process. Anyone want to chip in? Michael?
I'm really not sure I do agree with that, actually, if I'm honest. Sometimes you can't dictate the level of comfort that other people feel sharing things around why they don't feel psychologically safe in a team. Like that's not how that works. People will be vulnerable, they'll be anxious, they'll be angry, they'll be upset, and when they are that, then they're speaking more truth to each other than they would do at other times. Do people experience that as pleasant? Sometimes. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll have a completely different reaction, but will they have a greater understanding of each other and what's actually going on behind the mirror, if you like? Yes, they will. So you don't get towards an outcome of that kind of worth without it costing something on the way through.
I agree totally with you. I agree totally with you, Andy. There's another thing here, something I've said to you before, Lindsay, which is Mirror Mirror is an invitation to clients to kind of have a bit of a footle and fumble through the murk and the element of their relationships. And some clients will run screaming from the room at the possibility of that. And other clients won't really know what they've let themselves in for. I think they will, I think they do, but they don't. And so for us as facilitators, that's the moment where it's a bit like skiing down the black run off-piste with both hands tied behind your back and blindfolded. That's part of our work. Because we just don't know what we're going to run into. And I don't think, Lindsay, your trainings can't legislate for that. That's down to us as the facilitators to make sure that our practice can deal with that. That's not your responsibility. That's ours to make, and whoever it is who delivers Mirror Mirror needs to be comfortable with that as a possible.
So thank you, Steve, and I'll hear from more of you. But we haven't had it this bad ever before, I must say. So it's not always like this.
I'm actually quite pleased about that.
Well done to Andy. Yes,
I properly disturbed him. There we go.
You went down the ski slope and managed it.
I went down the ski slope. I went down the ski slope in a plough.
In a pizza, okay, but I suppose I want to take a different lens on this from a marketing and communication perspective. If you want people to spread the word and refer people to Mirror Mirror as a result of their experience, which is the strongest means of referral of growth. Are you surely making the experience as comfortable as possible while still not denying the reality of that experience will help? I'm thinking the answer is going to be no from you guys, isn't it?
No, I wouldn't say to my client doing this kind of work it's going to be comfortable. The exact opposite. I'd be saying, if you want to do this work, it's probably going to get a bit hairy at points. Yeah. How hairy, I don't know, but you know.
But we do it respectfully. So that's the thing. You know, I think the word comfort is not the right word. Yeah.
I think that your earlier point is key to this, is how you set it up with the client and prepare them for what's to come. And you know, it's so that they're going into this with a sense of anticipation that it's not necessarily going to be comfortable. And the whole conversation is around, well, what's your appetite for the messiness of the change you're looking for? Because if you're not prepared to tolerate that discomfort in pursuit of the change you need, then don't go there. But if you really feel you need change, then let's have a discussion about what this might entail, so that you're best prepared to get a good outcome from it.
It's a good job the market's quite big, isn't it? Because what percentage of people will do really want to get into that? I wonder. It'd be interesting to have your views in chat on the percentage of leaders who are willing to go into this kind of process. But no, I hear you. And when I share the video with you that we are producing, the script does basically say what you get out of it and how this goes depends on what comes up and how you handle it. May not always be comfortable. So I think it was just the reality that the kind of the real experience of hearing a leader be uncomfortable that wasn't expected, because I felt that, yeah, of course we're up for it. Yeah, delegate it. Yeah, no worries. I'll look at the data, but that was just a bit of a shock. So, I mean, I'm not the lead facilitator on these kind of jobs, so it's good to hear from you lot here. But so what would you do if there's, to ask Andy, what would you now do differently, if anything?
Well, I that's a bit of a, I don't really know what to do with that, if I'm honest. So I do most things with teams I work with differently depending on the team and the setup and what kind of work is going on. Yeah, I guess. Do you know, I'm not actually sure I do much different. When I look at what was shared on the way through the workshop and the comments that came up and the response from the rest of the team, it looks like job done to me, to be quite honest. Just that the team lead had a bit of a difficult time with it on the way through. So maybe rather than having that pointed at you, it would have been more useful if he'd called me in the middle. And
I probably would have insisted that the lead facilitator gets contact with the leader, even at least to offer a pre-meeting, even if the leader says he or she doesn't want it.
What happened in terms of aftercare with this leader?
So we offered a follow-up call, and it's still to be scheduled by them. They said, yeah, we will. We're just busy at the moment. Not anything yet. Apparently it still will happen, actually, because he did promise it, and I think he's a man of his word, but not yet been scheduled. And given that one of their consultants has already now done the training and wants to use it with clients, maybe they'll do it their way, which is actually a nice way for them to learn how they should do it too.
Isn't that a bit of do as I say, not as I do?
And wasn't that on one of the comment cards? Lead by example.
Yeah.
Shall we?
I just want to add that you're debating about that post-workshop survey, but I think that's really valuable because it sort of pulls it back together as a conclusion and indicates, okay, we've disrupted the system now, but now you've got to plan your action for what you're going to do in the next 3 months to address these. And, that's up to you. We can help you. Here's where you could get some resources. So providing that sort of support, I think, is important. But I can't wait for the 3-month survey, because I'll bet you anything that the numbers have gone up, so long as they've set a good strategy for the next 3 months as to what needs to be done.
And they've picked up those actions that came out from the team when we were in the workshop. Yeah.
And I suppose that's why my question, that was the reason behind my question about aftercare. How is this leader following up on his shell shock? Because I think there's a great as well, and I think it relates to one of the points that some of you made around, is he not paying attention at all that he's so shell shocked about what happened and he's externalizing all the things that are happening, but is he going introspective on this, and what support does he get or not,
Well, we don't know at the moment, but that's what we'll hope, I guess, to be talking to them about in terms of are they going ahead to write up the intentions from the workshop? Is there a plan to move ahead with those intentions?
And for him specifically,
is where does Mira's responsibility stop? So, and again, this is in the framing with the client, sort of flagging up the disturbance it may cause, and therefore in our experience, mirror, you might like to consider coaching for the team leader, or so the message is pay attention to the disturbance caused within your system, because there's a sort of duty of care thing quite as much as there is the potential for the disruption in your system.
And be ready for it.
You did offer coaching, didn't you, Andy?
Yeah. I mean, the commissioning lady and the client, the one who's gone through the mirror training and now wants to run it, is the only person there that I've had a conversation with outside the workshops, not the team lead himself. So I wouldn't put it as strongly as offered coaching, but I did speak to her after the workshop, but he's remained closed.
Yeah.
This is really helpful for me to hear, actually, because it's almost, so thank you, Andy. I think it's been really good to hear kind of the account and how that went. I certainly think the importance of coaching before, and you shared this model of kind of spending one-on-one with the CEO and then a one-to-one with each person and the follow-up, and I almost want to replicate something like that if this client that I'm thinking about would go ahead. But I'm actually listening to this almost convinced that they're actually not in a state of readiness, and I think they, as in the very senior team, are not actually ready to do the shift. And I think it was a bit going to what Michael was saying about, do you want this change? And unless they, as a leadership team, really want a change and are committed to going through that discomfort in order to get there, then they won't. And I almost feel like they're still head in the sand a little bit. So, heavier on the coaching to keep testing. When are you ready? Are you ready yet? But the part that I keep kind of having mindful about is maybe starting with the tool before you're ready. Like, be ready enough. There's almost a sweet spot, I wonder, because that discomfort might just help push you through the blockages that you might be having. I'm just talking and thinking, but I'm just like, it's bringing up a lot of different dilemmas.
That's a really, really good point, because on the one hand, you might say, well, yeah, do the report. Let's talk about it. We can circulate the report to the team, but nothing's going to change unless we just go through an alignment process with this structure. You can kind of bring them into it. I don't know. Yeah,
but I hear some of the signs, like, I literally just came out, and I mean, there's some of the things are like, let's not make this too complicated. We need just something really simple. And then I'm like, discomfort and complex and dynamic, that's how humans are. And that's what we need to be able to skill up to go through. And if that is the turn-off point, then I'm not sure we're really quite ready yet. And that, yeah, it's good food for thought.
Maybe I can just flip this over, because Sheila, I know that you've had a similar experience just about a week after Andy. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and whether they were ready for it and set up properly?
Yes, we did. And Carolyn, my colleague, who's not able to come this morning, she was the team lead on this. And she was picking Andy's brain several times, and she really appreciated that, because it did help us to be aware of what you had gone through, Andy. And so she spent, the two of us talked a lot with the director of HR. It's a smallish company. There's about 25 in total, but they have 5 different divisions, but the CEO reckoned everybody was one big happy team. So insisted that everybody fill out the survey as a solid team. And it was absolutely evident pretty quickly that it wasn't one big happy team, and there were lots of disparities in different areas. So we actually changed the second workshop so that it was just on the main original team, which was about 8 people. And so that changed a lot of the dynamics. But what it did was, I said it was a bit like pulling off the plaster, you know, it's sort of, there were some psychological safety things came up in ours as well. And we are writing it up as a case study with their permission. We got their permission before we started the whole thing. But I would say that Carolyn and I, probably before the workshop, before the survey, and then after the survey and pre-workshop, and then the second workshop, had extensive discussions with the director of HR primarily, but also the CEO. And it was the CEO that, frankly, suddenly had an aha moment when we talked about the alignment to their business strategy. And I said, could you start off the workshop by talking about the business strategy? And by the way, what is it? And he said, oh, well, it's quite obvious. It's this, 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 but it's just in his head. And so so that was where everything started to, you know, sort of unravel, and realize that, you know, there are, you know, some challenges. But also we did have the 2 people, it was all virtual, of course, but there are 2 people on different time zones who didn't, who don't work together at all, always calling up HR, complaining about the other one, you know, that sort of thing. And then one of them just didn't turn up for the second workshop, which was such a shame, because, you know, that was one of the clashes, but it was also an indicator. So we're actually about to submit a closeout report to them with our reflections, with, you know, our summary of what we've done for them, so that it's very clear what we have done for them, and what we don't want to put in recommendations per se, but pointing that, you know, there's actions that need to be done, but it, you know, it's up to them, just pointing them in that direction and offering follow-up if they want, from coaching and other resources, and encouraging them to set their plan of action for the next 3 months. So we're just in the midst of that.
And I think I remember on the measurement report, there were, even though the scores went down, there were a lot of positive comments in the what changed.
There were, yes, there were a lot of positive comments. I think I've actually got them here. Those are the ones that you sent to us that were not in the final report, is that right?
No, I'm thinking about the comments on the measurement report itself. I could probably dig it out if you want to share it. But
is that the ones where you're talking about great data like the breakouts? Wish we'd had more time, wish we'd done it in person, that one. There has to be better clarification on what the questions are. They were asking that. Oh, that's actually a point, because this is this is Canada, and in fact the place where this happened, where this took place, the business is in British Columbia, and that is the most British area of Canada. But sometimes they were a little confused by some of the wording, and you know, it was interesting. You think that language is the same, and it's not always interpreted, and we talk about this with clean language. So making sure that we're clarifying is so important as well. Thank you for bringing that up, Lindsay. Yes, you see how
what's interesting here is that the level of the spread of alignment has hugely improved. So they're much better aligned, but they're still deep in the process of coming out of these indicators in a positive way.
Yeah, you know, when I look at that though, that looks like a really good set of workshops. Well done. Because you've got some people at the beginning of that look a touch delusional about what's going on, and as you get to the second measurement, they no longer are. That's not left them any happier, but they're not so much heading a different story as they were at the beginning of it.
But the bars, I mean, they're all quite low, aren't they? I mean,
but that's not our responsibility though, is it? That's just a measurement of their current environment.
Not at all. It's just they've got a lot of work to do.
And
lots
they know
of teams do, you know. It's not actually that uncommon.
Yeah. And then,
but now they've had that conversation, like you said, about putting the elephant, you know, in the middle of the room. That discussion opened up all of, you know, this awareness, and the CEO had already made changes between workshops. The workshops were a week apart, and he said, "Whoa, I hadn't realized, you know, that my communication is not clear enough." So he already had made some changes.
So yeah, I think in many cases, sometimes this gives people who didn't have the opportunity to speak up, because freedom to raise issues and questions is very commonly in the low behavior scores, the opportunity to do that, and they just feel so much better about it.
Yeah,
that's one thing anyway. So, I mean, we kind of went on to a bit of a second case study there, but it's only because these two things that we've never really seen that before, where the schools have where we've measured while they're still obviously in the process. But anyway, it is all very good learning. And like you say, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
And like I say, we learned from Andy. So that was hugely helpful. And we worked very hard on the preparation of the two key people pre-workshops.
And the HR director really likes it, doesn't she? No?
Oh yeah, she's jumping up and down. She's very happy because it sort of validated. She had been hired because the CEO knew that he needed somebody that could handle HR for the company. It is in growth mode. He just acquired a new company, brought them in and said, here, join the one big happy family. Even though your business model is completely different from all the others, you know, so not really thinking that, you know, it's that easy to bring different people in and different businesses in and just create one big happy family. But the HR director realized that there were issues. But frankly, from inside, it was really hard for her to initiate them. And her hands were pretty much tied. So bringing in Mirror Mirror made that difference. And I'm pretty sure we'll get that type of attestation from her.
Right. She even wants to do a testimonial, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does.
Okay, well, I mean, unless anyone's got anything else, I want to thank you, Andy, for presenting, and also now to Sheila as well. and thank you, Andy, for helping Sheila and for making sense of all of these developments, let's put it that way, and helping to refine again how we approach this and what to expect and how to prepare other people for what to expect as well. So
pleasure.
Yeah, unless there's any other comments, I guess we're pretty much done for today. But really good to see you all. Any last comments?
No, just thanks, Andy, for bringing it.
Yes, thank you.
Good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tune in for the next episode of.
Okay, bye-bye.
Cheers.
See you.
Bye. Thanks, Andy.